Hello, Narmer fans. So before getting into today, I just wanted to thank everyone who watched the tier list video. That exploded way more than I thought it would. And if y'all want any other specific content or want any particular information, just feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll actually try and make the content that y'all are looking for. But for the most part, I try and create off-tempo content. For truly great content creators, please go see Daddy Free to Play or GG Easy. They're both phenomenal, far more entertaining, put far more effort into this than I do. What I like to do is look at this from more of an analytical, mathematical point of view. And if anyone has any particular questions around any of this information, I always hang out in Daddy Free to Play's chat and Theorycraft with his group over there. So I wanted to look at this patch since everyone else is already on board, right? You already know what's kind of going on here. But I wanted to look at this from a perspective of game balance. What are we looking for when this gets to the PTR? What numbers would we be looking at for this to be completely busted? So we're going to start off with Prometheus. And I'm hoping that everyone's at least looked at a video here on what he's all about. He's pretty simple. He is a single target DPS. Now, in previous content, I've always talked about analyzing the gaps in your gameplay in order to see whether or not an esper is right for you. Prometheus has a obvious counterpart in Lewis. Both are strong single target DPS. Where they really differ is that Prometheus is going to hit a little bit softer, but have much higher survivability. So he's definitely more of a bruiser version of Lewis. He's also going to be an absolute Fafnir god. So when we're looking at this, we need to first say, is there a niche that wasn't really filled yet? Or is he just a different flavor? Because we have Lewis over there, just, good old cherry flavor. Then we have Mateo over here coming in apple flavor. So we have good old red and green. So when we're looking at their kits, my big question is, are they just different flavors of each other? And what would the numbers need to be in order to make them stand out against each other? So when I'm looking at his abilities, the big thing is, you get increased attack and reduced damage. He's strong with support characters going behind him in order to be able to buff him up. And he has a lot of multi-attacks on his abilities. Now, the issue that we have here is that you would have to build him super tanky, so a lot of these attack abilities kind of go off by the wayside. I saw numerous people talking about building him crit damage, HP, speed in order to try and get damage and speed out of him. But I don't think he'll be much better than Lewis in terms of PvP. I believe he may survive better, but it's whether or not you're really able to survive to the true end game. If you're running like a true bruiser comp, the issue is right now, bruiser, you're trading off damage for survivability, which is kind of okay in a tank v tank setup. But Cleave will destroy Bruiser completely, because it's just a less tanky version of Tank. And Tank, in the current meta, will often find ways to either out-control or out-sustain the Bruiser meta. So from a balance perspective, he kind of fills the same niche as Lewis and me for PvP, where you're just hoping he's going to hit good. So what number would we need? 270% damage. That is a lot. I think Lewis is 480% in his full combo. Something like that. I'm terrible at math right now. So that's kind of what we'd be looking for on his ability 3, is that after speed conversion with damage, he needs to be hitting in the range of somewhere of upper 270s in order to really make that first hit matter, so that they don't just immediately heal it off and say, wow, wasn't that neat? So that's kind of where Prometheus is at in terms of balance. He's going to replace some niches in PvE, though. He is able to steal buffs, which Yeah, that's fantastic. But again, the number we're going to be looking for on that is 80+%. Because, let's see, I believe it's ability 2 that takes the buffs. Or ability 3. Yeah, each hit steals enemy buffs. Now, Tricky runs at 100%, 3 hits. That is the baseline for good for stealing buffs off somebody. And Tricky's AoE. If this ability isn't 100%, it's not good. Because it's single target, and yeah, that's not going to help you much. But if you do not have a strong Fafnir comp, he's going to dominate, just absolutely destroy Fafnir. So that's where I'm currently seeing him at. Then he will also be a god in DSL and Sonica. Sonica, he hits 3 times. You pair him with YC, you got 4 right there, and he just starts dominating people. His single target DPS will be good. And the only way it would be bad is if we were looking at ability 3 and ability 2 if they were like a 5-4 cooldown. Because then he's just not able to rotate quick enough for it to really matter. But in single target, he should be able to have Spark reliably on the boss. So he should just be cranking out turns. And just be doing absurd amounts of damage. So that's kind of where I see his niche at in terms of where we'll also need to be able to see his numbers. This needs to be, the S1 probably needs to be in the range of 120%, so 60% per hit. And ability 2 needs to be in the range of, I would say, 75% per hit. Because again, he's pure single target, and that just isn't that great in PvP right now. But in PvE, there's a lot of niche for him to fill. With his resonance, I don't think it really changes too much for him. Like, a lot of people are talking about his R2. It is good. It is in PvE, it would be great, because if the boss can be debuffed, if they can have Spark, then he has 100% crit rate, and it's just budget Gaius. We have Yamato over here, and the entire crux on his balance is going to come from this part. The consuming of the Rashomon stacks. So the way I'm looking at this is for him to actually be really good before R6, consuming the Rashomon stacks would have to do at least 30% health, 30% of his max HP and damage. And the reason why I say that is he's going to generate 10 stacks immediately if he opens S3. But you do not want the power scaling of an Esper to hit on their base kit. You want to have to build around them to maximize their potential. So what I'm seeing here, in terms of what would be great game balance and make them actually really good, is 1 to 2% HP damage per buff. So by default, that's 10% max HP damage. That's just Ashley. So that's not exactly a huge crushing blow there. However, if we were to say that it scales up to maybe a max of 30 stacks, even at 1% per stack, then that's 30% HP damage, and that's a big hit. That would destroy, since it's his max HP and not opposing max HP, that would basically be enough to be able to destroy any DPS you're looking for. But that would also involve doing almost the equivalents that I have in my Narmer setup, where you're just cranking out 6-7 buffs per champion. But I think that'd be a great spot for him to be at, is if he capped out at about 40 stacks, and then you just kind of explode him. If he doesn't reach that value, we're going to say he caps out at 10, maybe 15 stacks. I don't think he will be good before R6, because his ability to is great. You're able to go steal some AP, and it's not able to be resisted, but can be missed at R2. But we have TE for that, and I'm going to guess, if I had to put a value that would make that ability good, 5% per Esper per crit, coming out to 15% AP change, same as TE, absorb, redistribute. Now, the reason why I'm saying 15% is if you're to look at TE's ability, it's 30, but it doesn't really do anything else on top of it. So with this S2 doing major damage, well, hopefully major damage, Otherwise, if it's terrible damage, it needs to be at least 30% to be even worth considering him as an esper. And he also doesn't have a speed lead, which that's kind of why you run TE. It's not really the AP boost that gets resisted or missed too often. So yeah, I would say that 15% is what we're looking for right here. And that's across 3 hits, 5% per hit, per crit is what I'm thinking. And then the consumption of Rashomon, I think it would reach peak balance and make him very usable if it stacked up to, we'll even say 25, 2% damage. 2% would be too much on the low end. 1% damage per stack stacks up to 30. I think that's about where you'd want it, because then he does 1/3 of his HP. It's not enough to kill tanks, but it's a lot of damage. And it's true damage. And then, of course, it also matters whether or not you're going to allow it to crit. If that true damage is allowed to crit, yeah, that's a little bit different, because crits can do up to 4 times damage. If it's true paper damage, then that's just a lot of damage. So then 10% HP would be normal. Just because of crit. But from what we're seeing from previous true damages, they generally don't crit on top of it, because that would be busted. Then looking at his resonances, the only one we really care about is this one. Getting the extra turn, if you could do the 3-2 setup, he's just going to be busted. His R2 is solid, but again, you can miss. Which Wind is a fairly popular group right now, but there is still plenty that he could miss against. And then if you miss on one Esper, then you miss out on a bunch of AP redistribute, and your team becomes less consistent. And consistency is key. The other item we'll be looking at for is his ability cooldowns. If his ability 3, looking at it, it needs to be about 4 turns. 3 to 4 turns. If it's any more than that, it's not good. It takes way too long to ramp up. The attack buff is only 2 turns. It would be awful. So it needs to be 3 to 4 turns minimum in order to actually be good. Ability 2, that one we're looking at equivalent cooldowns. We want it to be either 3 or 4 turn cooldown, because you want to combo it off your ability 3. Then his S1's absolutely awful. You don't need to worry about it. Basically, you're just hoping that his 2-3 setup is going to be all you need. Now we have this complicated thesis of a character. So the big thing when we're looking at Windows XP here is whether or not the buffs will outweigh defense down. She can see play in Bruiser. You can run her as a tank, Bruiser tank, in which case it would be a little bit softer on what she needs to be able to bring. But the ability she's really competing against, the slot that she would be taking, is most likely going to be the same slot that's doing defense down, unless you're doing a one-punch build. And defense down is unbelievable. It can multiply your damage by hilariously massive factors. Because like if you're going from 0.5 times damage to 1.5 damage, that is not an increase of 100% damage. That is a 300% increase in damage. And that's not unlikely when you're removing 60% of somebody's defense, is you're really expecting to see anywhere from a 80% increase up to about 200% increase in damage. Minimum. And that's nutty. That's a shitload of damage. However, defense, we also have to consider the fact it can be resisted. It can be removed. JYY generally exists. So when we're looking at XP stats here, that's the first thing we need to get into mind, is can it outstack that damage loss from not having defense down? Because if you're running defense down and you're running her and you're running a sustain, or even if you're just running defense down her and 3 cleaves, you're still getting an opportunity cost of DPS in her slot. So we're not going to care too much about ability 1 here. Ability 1, crazy good for PvE. Absolutely nuts. But in PvP, these are the two abilities we really care about. And the reason why we care about ability 2 is going to be from the perspective of you will run her in Astral Witchcraft, because you want to trigger both these abilities. The more she triggers, the better she is, the more she summons the supports. So, how much damage do we want on S3 here? So we got all the soldier stacks and the horse stacks. And again, if we're losing out on, we'll even go on the low end and say 100%, or we'll say 80% damage from defense down. So we would want soldier plus horse to equal ballpark plus 40% paper damage. Get like a total of 5 to 10% per soldier stack, plus have horse be an additional multiplier on top of it. It also very much depends on whether or not they're additive or multiplicative. Because say you have 2 stacks of soldier, each one is 5%, so you're getting a 10% boost there. You also have horse on you, which we'll say gives you a 20% damage increase. Then you're hoping it's not 30%. You're hoping it's times 1.1 times 1.2, because that gives you significantly more damage. Because it scales up the damage you gained from that 10% gain by an additional 20% on top of it. So it's like anyone who's done banking, it's interest. It just keeps accruing on top and on top and on top. So that's going to be an interaction that will have to be kind of analyzed and tested to see whether or not that's actually completely busted. For the actual damage on her S3, I think it's very interesting that she does damage. So she does damage based on attack. I'm going to say this is 120%. That's their super vanilla default. What we're looking for there is anywhere from 80 to 120. If it's more than that, that's laughably busted. Then doing extra 2 damage based on the enemy's max HP and can exceed XP's attack. This is going to be 10%. 5 to 10% absolute max. If it's more than that, again, we're looking at her being completely busted. As Ashley is 120% plus 10% on top per crit. And this one doesn't even have the crit gate on top of it. It just does that damage. So what we can expect here is probably ballpark 100 with 10% on top. Miss rate's nice. So, but then she also calls a soldier to attack. A lot of S1s only do 50 to 70% damage, so it's not a huge boost. You're also rolling the dice. Say you bring a defense down or a booster with you. If they're the ones that get triggered, you're getting 0 damage out of it. So that's kind of an RNG hit there. So it's kind of hard to give a consistent damage value to that, much like with Alice's. Sometimes it's going to hit big, sometimes it's going to hit small. Sometimes it'll save the game. Sometimes it'll just be frowning and disappointment. So then on top of that, we also get attack up, useful. So we're looking at the chariot and the horse are going to be the main ones, as well as soldier. So each stack increases attack. What we were looking at is realistically 5 to 10%. Because you get 2 stacks right off. You just automatically have 2 stacks of soldier. It's great. If it's a 10% increase per champion, then she is, if you're going for a triple cleave, that's a 10% boost per each, which is only, 30% total increase there. Now, granted, not all boosts are considered equal, such as putting a 10% boost on Ashley is worth less than a 10% on Gaius, but we're just going to kind of average it out and say that it'll boost your DPS by roughly 30%. If it was 5%. If it was 10% on soldier, then yeah, you're looking at easily hitting 60% boost. She would then at that point be looking at heavily outweighing defense down. But then on top of that, you're going to have 2 horses. Horses, when we're reading it, most likely works with soldier. I mean, nothing in there says that it shouldn't. You should be able to be a horse, a soldier, and a chariot. Sorry, a horse and a chariot even is possible. And horse, we were realistically looking at about 20% damage boost. I think that's about where it should be, because then hypothetically that's two 20% boosts, and then on top of it you have the soldier boosts, one of which will become a chariot, and I'm going to assume the chariot is going to be worth 4 stacks of soldier. So yeah, that's around where we're looking at. It's about 5% for soldier, 20% for horse and chariot, and that's where it would about offset defense down in terms of damage. But since you're placing it on yourself, it's consistent. As we talked about, consistency is key. If you're able to be consistent, life is wonderful. You're no longer at the whims of Hyde's avatar procs. And the reason why I'm guessing that soldier goes up to 3 stacks is because of her R6, which gives 1 additional stack at the start of the turn. And so my guess is that if you have her at R6, it will instantly transform all your team into chariots, as well as 2 horses. And yeah, it'll just be absolutely busted. If that's 20% per, you're looking at 120% plus in terms of damage boosting, which would more often than not be better than running defense down. Now, if you could run both on a triple cleave, yeah, you're hitting for huge damage. The heavy cannon. So the cannon, when I'm looking at this, the first number that comes to my mind is, one, she's already going to do defense down. And so that's one of the reasons why you want to have Astral Witchcraft, is if you're able to get the double combo going, it's going to pop off and just be absolutely impossible to stop in terms of damage. Cannon, 40% defense ignore. If it is less than that, the ability is kind of bad. So what we're looking at is a 40 to 60 range. Narmer is 40 and universal, so that's kind of where I'm seeing this ability going to, is that it's going to basically give the same reduction you get from a Narmer 5 stack, which is just a part of his kit on top of the 187% attack damage that goes off AoE. As well as it will increase AP. Now, there's a lot of speculation on this one. If this is 100%, this is cracked. Unbelievable. It's going to be dumb. If it's 30%, it should be enough to boost your DPS up and have it be their turn. But it'll just be good in that case, because you're still going to want your DPS at 100% the same time that she hits 100%. You do not want them lagging 30% behind. The only time you would be okay with them lagging is if you plan to open S2 and it's 100% boost. Example being Abigail Cleave comps. Her S1, we're not going to talk about that. It's really good in PvE, and that's about it, because it's just going to boost your people and you just keep going. So, looking at this, she could very well be a fairly balanced Esper, if we are looking at it from the perspective of only giving 5 to 20% as her total boosts, because then she still requires some decent setups. If we're to see soldier is 10% per stack, oh, she's laughably broken. If you see that, just immediately just turn away. You don't need to see that kind of violence on TV, because that's going to be a flat 20% damage boost before you hit chariot, before you hit horse. It's going to be bad. And we're going to be seeing a lot of whales with her at R6, because it's going to be her banner out of this. So that's kind of where I'm looking at these numbers in terms of balance. I'm actually very curious where they do end up on these numbers and how close I actually got. I believe that XP is the most likely to not have good numbers on her. I believe that there's a high probability that we are going to find out soldier's 10%, and that she's just flat out better than defense break. But let me know what y'all think. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen on the PTR. I can't remember if that's tomorrow or the day after. Either way, I'm really excited to see what these numbers are going to be looking like. I believe that it could ultimately bring Cleave back into the meta. Basically, your options would be to run Nushi and be a controlling bruiser comp, or you run XP and you run a hard Cleave comp, There's a little bit of gray area in there for XP in a bruiser comp, but as I said, I'm just not a huge fan of that idea. I need to see how it ultimately pans out. Other than like a CJ Exodia comp, because like in Exodia, you could place her in there and just buff up CJ, but the issue is that he's not going to get horse because his attack's going to be too low since he's defense scaling. So there's going to be a really interesting arms race, because it's also going to be the same for Everett, where you're trying to buff up people who can't be buffed. And so I don't see him really fitting super well into the bruiser like CJ comps, because, or any of the HP percent scalers, because they're not going to be naturally targeted. So you're going to have to build an awkward amount of attack on them in order to get targeted. So let me know what y'all think, what y'all are looking for, and if there's any content or anything like that that y'all wanted my opinion on, feel free to just mention it in the chat, and I'll try and slap something together. I hope y'all have a fantastic week, and I will probably post something once we actually know those numbers and see how it looks from a game design and balance perspective. Y'all have a good one.